Hello, gay people. Welcome to episode 5 of Kings on the Aux, the podcast where drag kings talk music and gender performance. I'm your host, Caius Crow, also known as Ben. As you may hear, I am recording with a sore throat. Didn't have that problem while recording the actual episode a couple months ago, but of course I got sick the weekend before release day. I don't think I've mentioned on the podcast yet that I'm chronically ill, and as a result of various conditions lowering my immune system, I get sick very easily. So if you are a chronically ill queer trans person listening to this, I get it. Let's just cross our fingers for each other that we don't get sick for Pride season. For this episode, I had so much fun interviewing my drag dad, Macho Grande, who recently celebrated his 13-year anniversary as a drag performer. My history with Macho goes back before we ever met, when I was still underage and legally couldn't go to most shows. My first exposure to drag was seeing the Cleveland Kings action pack on social media. CCAP is no longer active, but they had a huge impact raising funds for charity and creating a performance space for kings at the same time. Macho is a founding father of CCAP, so even before I saw him live, I really admired his work in the community. And if I didn't have that example of what drag could look like and what it could do out in the world, I don't know that I would have been motivated to go to shows, and I definitely wouldn't have started performing years later. So, long before he adopted me, Macho deserves a lot of the credit for me existing as Caius. And since then, I've been so grateful for the ways that he has mentored me and shaped me, both as a king and as a friend. Once Macho and I started talking, one thing we bonded over was making mixes. We both perform mixes pretty much exclusively. I've never seen Macho perform a number that wasn't a mix, and I've performed a single song exactly once, which was still fun, but just not quite as fun as finding those common threads between multiple songs and creating a story for myself. We talk some more about Macho's creative process for mixes during the episode, if that's a storytelling element in drag that you're curious about. It was so funny hearing back the combination of literary and cinematic vocabulary that we kept using when we talked about mixing. It has to be something with the English major. The performance we focus on in this episode is Macho's Latino mega mix. He'll describe it in the next few minutes, but this mix is an amazing multidimensional celebration of Latino and specifically Mexican American culture. I really love this mix because the balance here of personal narrative and political expression is some of the most rewarding kind of art that you get to see in drag. And there's also a joy and sense of humor that characterizes Macho's drag. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Let's get started. You have so many awesome mixes that it was almost impossible for me to choose one. I want to talk to you about more someday. But for now, zeroing in on the Latino mega mix, how would you describe this mix in a few sentences?
This is the crystallization of what I interpret Latino culture and Mexican American culture in the United States to be. So it is rejoiceful, it's silly, and it is angry.
Absolutely. Yeah. What I want to do with the materials you sent me in mind, because you sent me an extended version of the mix. It opens up with about 5 minutes of you speaking, and then about 4 minutes of music. There's also a PowerPoint that goes with it, which I really wish the listeners could see, but this is audio. So what I really want to do is that we go through the mix song by song, and then we circle back to the introduction. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds great.
Wonderful. So the first song is Tequila.
A classic. You gotta.
Of course. So tell me more about why you picked Tequila as the opener.
So when I was growing up, I grew up in a very white, capital T, Midwestern Ohio town. So I didn't know what it was like to be Mexican American. My parents were very assimilationist. They didn't really tell me. So I gravitated towards anything that even sounded Mexican. Anything, I don't know how, but it's like Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash. Has those like Mexican horns. Johnny Cash, definitely not Mexican. But this kind of era of music that used a lot of these sounds and these cultural influences from Mexico and Latino culture. And tequila was always one of them. And also you get it in commercials. You get it in a lot of different pop culture aspects because it's like easy listening and it's simple. And I even looked it up before I put it in the mix where I'm like, a Latino has to have touched this for me to use it in this mix. And it turns out that I might have to double check. I might have to come into the edit and grab a name. But I want to say the saxophonist, Mexican American, and I was just like, incredible. This is all I need. A Latino touched it. Let's do it. Because if it was a Ring of Fire Johnny Cash situation, I'm going to have to find a different option. Because it's like, that's great that this is influential and this conjures like a Latino flavor, but it doesn't do me any good if white people are just taking that cultural influence and using it.
Yeah. No, it is a super influential song. I was doing some reading. Like, obviously, I've heard Tequila as much as everyone has, but I wanted to do some research into it, and it, like, won a Grammy at the first ever Grammys in 1959. It's been really influential, like, both when it was first released, and then now, we still hear it everywhere. And I appreciate that you brought up the saxophonist. The saxophonist I read recently is Danny Flores, who is credited as like a forefather of Latino rock in a lot of ways. And he did the saxophone. He also did the spoken solo, so the only spoken lyric in Tequila. Is Danny Flores. And it just went on to become a really recognizable earworm and party song, and I think it sets us up nicely for the arc that we're going to follow. After Tequila, we cut into Insane in the Brain. So tell me about that. What role did you see for that song in this mix?
I love Latinos engaging in rap culture. I love Latino rappers. They have a wide berth. Some good, some not so good. But I do think that Cypress Hill is this mainstay, and it again kind of conjures up that, like, for me, when I was growing up, like that 1990s kind of Latino culture. I'm trying to like formulate my own idea. They are not related, but I also associate Cypress Hill with like the Homies characters. You're familiar with the Homies characters because they kind of look like the Homies characters. They are these a little bit like archetypal kind of like California Mexican Americans who have like big sunglasses and bandanas and like low pants, and they are a manifestation of the diaspora that exists in California. And it is just like, again, it's a banger. Like Insane in the Membrane, I feel like everybody knows one part of it. Maybe not the faster rap parts, but you know, Insane in the Membrane, and then Insane in the Brain. You just know it. Like, it's jock jams for sure. And it's just so fun and, like, hyped. And they are just, they're talking shit about the cops. And you can't go wrong with that. They're talking shit about the cops. They're also talking about partying. They're talking about not paying their light bill. All relatable content for me.
For sure. Yeah, and I like that you can, I imagine, I haven't actually seen you do this number live, but I imagine when you get to that point in the mix, you can have almost an audience call and response. You can really have, like, enthusiasm for it if you want to play with people while you're doing it.
Yeah, I think that is like, everybody knows Tequila, but there is one word. And then Insane in the Membrane, you're like, somewhere in my life I have heard this song against my will. And now I'm still hearing it against my will right now, watching this little guy do stuff on stage. Mystery. A mystifying combination. But it's so funny.
Perfect. I love this imagined emotional journey for the audience that we've got. Your third song is La Bamba, so specifically the Richie Valens version, right? So I know for me, if we're talking about Mexican American and Mexican music, this is probably the first song that comes to mind. Again, I feel like it's one that everyone has heard and everyone can recognize it, even if a lot of people who don't speak Spanish are probably going to be just mumbling along to it. They know the title, they know the hook. So tell me about this section and the role of that third song.
La Bamba has always been it's like the Mexican American anthem. And, outside of Selena, which Selena has her own journey. But when I was first starting drag, my whole thing was always going to be I wanted to uplift and promote and live in my Latino-ness. And I always wanted to do Richie Valens because he is the guy. He is the king of guitar for that era. And so La Bamba is a really fun song, but it is also kind of la 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 Bamba, and that's kind of not it, but it's repetitive, and so you can only do so much. So it's nice to have it in there as a feature. It's a minute long or so, but you get that kind of iconic moment and that cultural reference.
Definitely. Yeah, and it is about a minute. Honestly, this mix as a whole really clips along because it's 4 songs in 4 minutes. Where really there's definitely levels, but there's not a lull. You're going to keep people's attention the whole time because something is changing about every minute. Honestly, I think I want to pause for just a second before we move on to our closing song. I want to think about the structure of this mix for a minute. Once we get to the third song, that's the earliest that you can pick up a pattern, and the pattern that I'm picking up is we're alternating Latino music from the 50s and Latino music from the 90s. So tell me about that. Was that the kind of arc that you had in mind when you were mixing this?
Not intentionally, but I think that choosing these songs that I was so influenced by as a young Mexican American trying to find an identity, it was these are the things you gravitate towards. And yeah, it is there's great Latino music in every era, but we're kind of going, at least for me, what is the biggest, what am I grabbing onto the most, and it is those things. The 90s, nobody needs to know how old I am, but I grew up in the 90s, and so those things lived in my very nascent brain. And then the older stuff has just had the opportunity to be in pop culture for so long that they are pillars of Mexican American culture. And so I hadn't made the connection that it was the 50s and the 90s and then the 50s and the 90s again. I was just what I try to do if I make a mix is if I have things that are kind of similar, I don't think Cypress Hill and Rage Against the Machine are similar, but I think if you put them next to each other, they blend a little more. So to have 4 songs in a mix, it's better to be hard lines between genres. And usually if I make a mix, I try not to do bands or genres that are similar to each other. I try and really go very disparate in what I use. And I think that for me, I'm Cypress Hill and Rage Against the Machine are not the same, but anybody who's never heard those 2 bands as much as I have might be these could be the same guys, Yeah,
I agree. The contrast, both the sense of contrast from song to song and the sense of symmetry across the mix, I think really do it a lot of favors to keep it dynamic and keep it unified. We've started talking about Rage Against the Machine, so I want to get into that now. Close out with Bulls on Parade. So what I really appreciate about that in this mix is, you were talking earlier about the emotional beats that we're hitting, it's a really defiant note to end on for this number that I read as just as much a protest number as it is a celebration. So why Rage Against the Machine and why this song?
I think that, Rage Against the Machine is now kind of protest dad rock. I am not as like intimately acquainted with them as I am, say, like System of a Down, which is like my political awakening band as a young adult.
Yeah.
But I think that Rage Against the Machine quantifies this, like specifically 90s, specifically American, specifically like marginalized people, ennui and frustration and anger, literally a Rage Against the Machine. So yeah, I think that, you know, using Rage Against the Machine applies to a lot of sentiments in the United States now and when the song came out. I've used this mix in the past to, you know, like we all have, kind of like bring light and talk about Palestine and Palestinian liberation. I originally I made this number for an all Latino show, and I recently did this number to, you know, protest the recent uptick in ICE raids. So it applies to a lot of situations, especially in the United States, and I think it works to highlight all marginalized communities.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because Anubis, your cat, is in my lap, and I'm narrating this because he's very cute, and he's eating my earbuds. That's okay though, I understand. They're very tempting. There we go. Hopefully that's a little more out of the way for you. Yeah. I remember you said earlier that it was important to you that like every song that was in this mix a Latino had touched, and I didn't actually know until I was preparing for this interview that Zach De La Rocha is Mexican American. So I think that's one, it's kind of fucked up that I didn't know that. I don't know if a lot of people don't know that or if I was just out of the loop. But I think that's being able to connect like a really iconic protest band to a love letter to Latino music is really powerful in itself. Is there anything that you wanted to speak on in the lyrics and how they resonate with the way you felt in this mix and the story you wanted to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this to you off mic, but I've heard this song so many times that I've stopped hearing the words. And since like putting it into a mix, I've really stopped hearing the words, where you're just like, these are mouth sounds, like but I do love it, one, because it's like, you know, weapons not food, not homes not shoes, not need, just feed the war cannibal animal, walk to the corner to the rubble that used to be a library, line up to the mined cemetery now. Yeah, as you know, as a librarian, as a person who cares about the world, these are universal sentiments that have persisted in the United States forever, and they feel probably a lot more dangerous and nefarious now, but they have always been this sentiment. And I really love the chorus of rally round the family with a pocket full of shells. They rally round the family with a pocket full of shells. So because in the past, I've like pulled out rose petals, I'll pull out, you know, I'll tear up those pieces of paper and I'll like throw them, or I'll blow them. And it is just the idea, it's the idea of a lot of things. I don't know what, you know, Zach De La Rocha thinks about this song, but to me, it feels like we talk about the traditional family. We talk about traditionalism. We talk about white heteronormativity and children and the nuclear family. And if you are not that, or if you do not have the wherewithal or the resources to support that, you get nothing. You get shells. It is also that the United States is responsible for international war since its inception, and in destroying the lives of millions of people and destroying homelands and colonizing territories, those people get nothing. They get shells. And I think that is applicable to so many situations. It's applicable on a domestic level, on a personal level, on an international level, on a solidarity struggle level. And again, Zach De La Rocha, come into my DMs if you disagree. But if I'm listening to this song and I hear that, that is just what I think about. The idea of the military-industrial complex, the United States war machine, not supporting mental health, not supporting housing needs, not supporting basic human rights and human dignity and the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but absolutely sending $3 billion to Israel. Like, that is, again, a thing the United States has always done, and is a thing we contend with as residents of the United States, and what we do to talk about that and counteract that and fight that.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of that resonance that we can hear is why we're left with such an impact and such a memory when this mix is over. I want to talk about your introduction. Hello.
You can put him down.
Does he want down? Will he get himself down?
Come on, buddy. He doesn't need help. He's just being silly.
I never quite know how to pick up a cat, because I know that they're more bendy than dogs. So I know the couple times I've picked up cats, they got like slightly offended because I tried to because like dogs, you need to support them like under both sets of legs.
Okay.
And cats get like offended if you go behind their back legs. At least a lot of the cats that I've met did.
Oh, I feel like this guy, you gotta, because he's so heavy. No, you can flip him. He's fine. He's just being a baby. He's like, he doesn't know if he's coming or going, you know?
Oh, that's comfy. That's good. Okay. But I want to get into your introduction to this mix in the extended version of it. And I think that I'm going to cut in some of the mix itself right about here.
Macho Grande is a bad Mexican, but not a bad hombre. So what does that mean? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Macho Grande, a heartthrob, a menace, a dangerous shenanigans expert who integrates Mexican-American heritage and camp into all of my performances. But before there was the locally famous and globally renowned Macho Grande, there was Pequeña Sanchez. And Pequeña Sanchez was always told she was Mexican-American, but she didn't really understand what that meant, except that she was different from all of her non-Mexican, all white-bread classmates.
I know that I was really moved when I heard you talking about your experiences, like growing up Mexican-American and feeling both othered in a white environment, but also disconnected from Mexican-American identity and culture because of your grandfather and father's relationships to their cultural identity and what they had internalized.
My grandfather, whose family was crossed by the border, was a translator in the Korean War, didn't instill a sense of ethnic identity, ethnic pride, or ethnic culture in any of his 7 children. He abandoned all of them with an identifiable Hispanic surname in a rural, predominantly white Ohio town. My father, abandoned, would internalize the moniker culo blanco, too white for the Mexicans and too brown for white people. He would go on to try and tell me that we were, quote unquote, Spanish, even though our relatives are from the state of Coahuila, Tamaulipas, and Oaxaca in Mexico, and the borderlands of Laredo and Brownsville in Texas. Without any cultural guidance, Pequeña Sanchez identified with whatever images were presented to her, for better or for worse. Images of sleepy Mexicans and gangsters and migrant workers and Don Juans and fiery Latinas and unidentified brown sidekicks with unplaceable accents. An entire cast of what Pequeña would learn were beaners, spics, and wetbacks. And she learned what they were because that's what she would eventually be called.
I would like to hear you talk about both that presentation, that monologue itself, and also the context of it. How did it feel to open up like that in a drag setting?
It was challenging, and I did it because Hong Kong Productions, shout out Big Top and Little Bottom.
Love them.
They were doing their show their vaudevillainy, and they really encouraged you to do something different. Like, you could just do a straight drag performance, but they were like, whatever weird thing you want to do that you couldn't do anywhere else, you can do it here. And I'm like, I would love to know how to juggle. Right? No, I wouldn't. I don't need to know how to juggle. I would love to, like, have another talent just kind of, like, out of the bag where I'm like, I really want to do this. I'm like those girls on RuPaul's Drag Race where it's like their talent is drag. I'm just like, this is what I got. So I figured I would try to like build out the Latino mega mix because it did mean so much. And usually when I do mixes, they're silly. Like, they're silly, stupid stuff, and they have all these songs crammed into them because they're funny. And this one was a little more like, these are all significant and they all speak to a very significant part of me. And so it had a lot of emotional resonance that I didn't really anticipate from making the mix and then, like, performing the mix and then performing it again and performing it again. So I was excited at the opportunity to make it. I had also, if anybody, you know, my entire shtick, to this day, but also in 2024, was that I was running for president. And so in running for president, one of my slogans was "Make America Mexico Again."
Yes.
Which we're still working on it. But in doing that is also kind of talking about, like, the colonization and the Mexican-American War and how Mexican people were treated in the borderlands and how that kind of translates all the way up to modest Cleveland, Ohio, in your modest Macho Grande, and how that legacy continues to exist through Mexican-American people and the diaspora. And I was like, I had this idea and I wasn't sure what I would say. I thought I really just wanted to talk about, like, all of my silly facts about Mexican history and Mexican American history and what it means to me and what I've learned over the years, because I've had to learn it myself because nobody taught me in any of my education, and figuring out what that looks like. And then I realized that through talking about what I had learned, I had to talk about why I learned it, which is because I had to research it myself because of my own, like, disconnection with my grandfather and with my father and with my Mexican side of the family. Is that in that, like, journey of doing my own genealogy research and doing my own, you know, research into Mexican American history and Latino culture in the United States, I found out a bunch of stuff that helped me identify myself and place myself inside of the context of where I exist in the United States, in Ohio, in Cleveland, and inside of the diaspora.
I know that there are some pictures of some documents that you found from Luis Sanchez is listed. Do you want to talk about that and what finding those documents was like for you?
Sure. I didn't know. My grandfather died when I was like 10, so I was very little, and he wasn't really around. He is his own character where he had like 2 or 3 secret families, and he also abandoned my dad's family when my dad was like 5 or 6. So he was not really around even before he died. And he didn't really have a lot of capacity to tell anybody anything, really. So I went looking, and, you know, I found him, which is who I knew, and then I just kept trying to go backwards. And I eventually, you know, I found that he was named after his father, who was also a Luis. Eventually, my grandfather went by Ernest. So, you know, changing his name, and then also, I don't know if you've ever tried to look up the last name Sanchez for anything, but there are about 1,000. It is the Mexican Smith. It is not working out. So it's very difficult to discern, because also, like, through the imperfections of physical notation, or through maybe lack of, I don't know, I'm implying a nefarious lack of interest, because Mexican people were not considered white for a very long time, that names were wrong, names were flipped around. There's the Latino convention of hyphenated last names, or like double last names, and those are very confusing in the early 20th century for folks who might not be trained or used to kind of documenting those names. So it is a journey. I have a lot of documents both for my Mexican side of my family and my mom's side of the family, just because it kind of helped me figure out where they lived, where my Mexican side of the family lived, which is Brownsville, Texas, which, if you're familiar with Brownsville, Texas, it is on the most southern tip of Texas. Yes. It is Mexico, not even light. It's like Mexico medium. So they were from Brownsville and Laredo, both border towns. And you hear the aphorism that the border crossed us, which is a popular Latino, Mexican American specifically, catchphrase, that it's like, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo took a third of Mexico's land, and so everybody who was on it kind of nobody was really sure what to do with them, where it's like, well, technically you are part of the United States now, but we don't really want you. And that became, I think, especially codified in the early 20th, late 19th century, as those borders become harder, and also jingoism kind of takes hold in that 20th century sense. So you kind of have to figure out, like, well, in a black and white dynamic, it's like, do we let Mexicans be white? No, we can't let them be white. So in 1930, it's the only year this happened, the census says the race is just Mexican, which is a choice, for sure. But it does kind of show the dynamics of the United States race politics. It is also a political move, because if you allow Latinos or Mexican Americans to be white, then you also face school integration with Mexicans. And there's a whole complicated history with that I won't get into. But, the politics of race are at an impasse with Mexican American people. And I think that is just a fascinating history, and especially in border states or southwestern states, and I exist in largely milquetoast Ohio. But just as like a tangent, it was funny because in my hometown, I was like the most Mexican American person, because everybody is egregiously white, and then I moved to Cleveland and everybody thought I was Puerto Rican.
Yeah, that is because I have, in college, I took a lot of Spanish language and culture classes, and one of the first things they teach you in those is that Ohio is kind of one of the odd ones out in the U.S. It's one of the only states where, in terms of like Latino, like intra-community demographics, Puerto Ricans are actually a larger demographic than Mexican Americans. Mexican Americans are the largest demographic in a lot of the U.S. states, but not in Ohio. So it can be a bit of a reversal and a bit of a disconnect for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I'm not embarrassed to tell you that when I was a kid, growing up trying to find Latino identity, I did not know what Puerto Rico was. I assumed everybody was Mexican American. Ricky Martin, Mexican American. J-Lo, Mexican American. Like, there was no... Also, it tells you how bad the public school system was, where it's just like, I have no idea that Puerto Rico exists. I probably, like, unless I was, like, of the ethnicity, probably wouldn't know what Mexico was, because it was just, like, nobody really talked about, like, the cultural influence outside of racist stereotypes that you get in pop culture. So it was just like, well, there's no specific that I'm seeing. Because, again, I thought everybody was Mexican American. I don't see, like, I'm sure Puerto Rican stereotypes exist to this day and existed when I was growing up. But to me, I was just like, Speedy Gonzalez exists. So that is, like, my touchstone at a very early age.
Definitely, when you have those stereotypes and those racist cultural images and you feature a couple of nice collages of them in the PowerPoint that accompanies the presentation, you have this flattening of differences, of what people's cultures actually look like, because there you just see this one stereotyped image. Thank you, because that is very necessary context and shows why this protest and celebration mix is necessary and impactful. So I know for the Hong Kong show, this mix is contextualized and introduced by you speaking, and you've performed this number in a shorter version without that introduction. How do audiences generally receive it? Do you feel like they get the message?
Yeah, I think it's a little different every time, and I think that's really interesting. Like at the All Latino show where I first did it, controversial statement. I was the only king, and so I was not getting featured. I wasn't getting featured anyway. That's not against any of the other performers. Just a tough gig for a lonely king. There's that. And then I found that, when I usually do this number, I usually do it, at least in the last few times, I'll do it in, Dia de los Muertos paint. So I'll have, a skull face on. And I think that also really helps convey the message of both, this is a cultural celebration, and also there is death somewhere. Like, the state is perpetuating death against people who are less powerful than the state, which is literally everyone. The last time I did it, I thought it was funny because it was unfortunately, there was a technical issue and the mix skipped, so it went to the last half of the Cypress Hill bit, and people were just stoked about Cypress Hill, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know. I'm like, this is a room of 30-year-olds, So I went to Cypress Hill and then to La Bamba, and then when the Bulls on Parade, the Rage Against the Machine hit, I was like, there's just a bunch of butt rock nerds in here. Everybody was just very excited about that, and it was funny because it was earlier in the show, Limp Bizkit had played. I'm like, everybody's going off for this specific genre. So it's interesting to see. It's is it a genre thing? Is it a culture thing? Is it a message thing? Is everybody just excited to see me, which is what I hope? No. Yeah. It's macho. Whatever I do, just come out and fart into a bag, and I'm getting the money. Gosh, I wish. I hope that happens. If I fart into a bag, please if you will give me money.
Yeah. Since we started getting into the embodiment and choreography of this mix, I want us to focus on that for a moment. Tell me more about the costuming and the reveals when you do this performance. Where do we start and where do we end?
Yeah, so we start with, I have my Dia de los Muertos paint on. I have typically a cowboy hat, some sort of hat to reference the caballeros, which are the original cowboys, Mexican American cowboys. I'm wearing my poncho, my colorful traditional Mexican poncho, and then I take that off to do about halfway through for the Rage Against the Machine section, kind of whip that bad boy off, and I reveal I have white chaps, which I made. Very excited to make a successful pair of chaps. And in the past, I've worn a white shirt. For the Hong Kong show, I wore a shirt that said Tierra y Libertad, which is land and freedom in Spanish. And then this last show, I wore a shirt that says Viva Queer. So long live the queers. And for that, mostly because for that Hong Kong show, I ended up tearing that other shirt, so I needed a replacement. But I thought it was very powerful.
Definitely.
But I love that because it's, I always try and see where I fit into my identity in the diaspora and what feels good. Because for a long time I struggled with the idea that it's I'm not Latino enough, right? I'm not XYZ thing enough. Both white people will tell you that because they have a conceptualization of who you are and they will try and make you that thing. There is that. And then there's also people who grew up more instinctually tied to the diaspora, grew up in the Southwest, grew up with cultural foods, cultural garb, speaking a language, understanding a shorthand, and I had to learn everything I know. But what I came to understand is that, having to learn and investigate for yourself is the Latino experience.
Yeah, especially when in your introduction you talk about the impact of colonization. And earlier you mentioned that census records, it's often maliciously, this information is sometimes not recorded properly in the first place and then made difficult to find. So it is a searching process and a self-discovery process. I just really love this mix, and talking about the like timely element of it, where we have the 50s and the 90s cut together, it really makes me feel like this enduring history of Latino art. Like when you do this mix, and when I listen to it, I get a sense that you're saying almost like, we're not going anywhere. We've been here. We're not going anywhere.
Definitely. And I think, in my presentation, I talk about, I internalized a lot of the racist stereotypes I saw growing up. There's always like, there's like the criminal, there's like a sleepy Mexican, there are like a lot of tropes that are really harmful to folks. But once you learn that there is an entire history, and that our history is not whatever white people have decided to make us, or white culture has decided to make us, that it feels much more powerful to say, I am attached to this cultural legacy, and this cultural legacy has influenced the wider American culture, and it has influenced the culture across the world. So it's hard to take that away.
In terms of the extended version of the mix, I'm curious about the staging of it. So when you have the introduction and the monologue playing, where are you on stage for that?
I am just in the center of the stage. I am just sort of like the object, basically. I am in that poncho. I'm in that hat. When I performed it, I talk about this might be what I was trying to remember. When I talk about in my presentation, getting called racial epithets growing up, like getting called a beaner, getting called a spick, getting called a wetback. And I'm saying it now on this podcast because like they hurt so badly. And I think about being called that as a child, as like and in my presentation I have photos of me when I was a child. I'm like, who would say that to a child?
Yeah.
Like, who would say that to anyone, but especially a child? And so I'm holding signs with these words, and when the mix when we get to a certain point in the presentation talking about the cultural legacy that we learn, I tear them up, which is really very simple, but I think very effective.
Yeah. Just
because it is cathartic, both for me, I hope it's cathartic for the audience to realize like the absurdity and the audacity of saying these things to anyone at any time, but also especially like to a child. I can't emphasize this enough. And throughout my entire life, basically, until I moved to Cleveland, not an endorsement for the place I grew up, but I think it was very helpful for me just because I think it releases the idea that you are one thing, whether that thing is this racist epithet, or it is that you are limited to being not enough of whatever your cultural identity is. Because in my universal experience, nobody feels like they're enough in their experience.
Thank you. I definitely wanted to make sure that I got that in there. Thank you for remembering, and thank you for sharing. So I want to discuss a little more. We've started getting into it. I want us to take a second with the structure of mixes, because that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you as a guest on the show, because I feel like we're of the same mind on a lot of things when it comes to how to put a mix together and what story arcs can look like, and that's where the family resemblance is.
You got me immediately. I'm like, this one's smart, Yeah,
that's been really fun. I've enjoyed that. So, if you had to give a craft talk, a TED talk on making a mix, what would you want to tell people? How would you describe the process?
I've got a couple things, which is I love dumb shit. I want to laugh. Like, if I don't even care if you're doing like a ballad. I'm like, I want to laugh. This is not a critique. For me, I struggle with doing just like a song straight through, no edits. That is not a critique of anybody who does that. I just struggle to do it. Meanwhile, I'll be writing a 3-act play of absurdity based on just like an abstract idea. But if I'm writing a mix or I'm making a mix, it kind of depends on like where I kind of let it lead me. So like you mentioned with this Latino mega mix, did not think that it was 50s 90s than 50s 90s, but I was like, these songs are different together, but they have a central theme.
Yeah.
And I like that. And I usually, like I said, try and go like diverse genres, diverse tempos, diverse vibes. So I'll start out with like a hard hitter, a song people know, or something that's kind of like a big bang, kind of fast, or like catchy, that sort of thing. I think you can dip in the middle, or you have to like change tempo.
Yeah.
And so I'll try and do that. So that gives you room also to like get tips, you know, walk around, do a little crowd work. And then how I tend to go in the last song in a mix, I'm thinking 3 songs for some reason, but in the last song in the mix, that is like, that's your big money, that's your like showstopper kind of, you are doing the silliest thing, you're doing the most dramatic thing, you're doing a reveal, you're doing your like your message. So that's what I usually go for. Also by that point, I'm usually trying to stop moving. I'm like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I gotta, let me just stand for a second. Or you can kind of flip it. So it's like you start off slow and then you build to bigger. I know that's always like a tried and true technique, but you know, it, like I said, it kind of depends where with certain mixes, I'll see what works together.
Yeah.
And I'll try different songs. There are so many songs on my laptop that I downloaded hoping they would work for a mix, and then I just went, this is not the one. But it is just like trial and error. I know that I made a good mix if I laugh at my own mix because I'm an idiot. And I'm just like, that's funny. That's really funny. I'm just like in front of my laptop patting myself on the back. But, which is, you know, again, funny with this mix where it's just like, it's not funny, but it is just sort of like, oh, that's good. Like, I love, like, the transition from La Bamba to Bulls on Parade is so stark that it's so satisfying to hear.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I'm like, these go together. And they don't just go together because it's like, they have Latino artists in them. But I'm like, they're just, I don't know, like you just find that spot and you hit it, and there's like nothing like it where you're like, I have made music as a concept now. Like I've reinvented the genre.
No, but I can feel that. I get that because like that's something that I'm listening for. Like a lot of my mixes I've ended up coming across accidentally because I put a playlist on shuffle and suddenly I realize like, oh no, the start of this song and the end of the song before it, it's perfect. There's something in common, and it's like, I don't know what it is they have in common because they're different tempos, different instrumentation, different sounds entirely, but they flow into each other, and I just want to show somebody else that.
Yeah, totally. Like I did a mix years ago that I haven't done since because it's, I don't know if it's a crowd pleaser, but it was Bruno Mars' Grenade or whatever that song is called, where it's like, threw a grenade for love. I did that with Nookie, and I thought it was funny, and I think it is still funny. I don't know that the crowd loved it, but I'm like, these are the same song. I don't know how to tell you that Nookie and Grenade are the same song, but this man did it all for the Nookie, and this man did it all for love. I
hear it. I can hear it.
I don't know why. I'm going to have to re-listen to it. I don't think my editing skills were as good than either, so I would try and like maybe finagle it more, but I think it's there. I also did a mix with Linkin Park and Britney Spears, and I think those noises are the same. I think they are just the same kind of like DJ kind of sounds. And I'm like, these are, I don't know, they also feel like they have the same color palette. You know?
I'm sorry, if I was making a face, it was because I just realized I also have a Linkin Park Britney Spears mixed draft. There's something about it.
It's also, like, it could be an era, but there are just, like, there's a satellite of sounds that you just think, like, go into each other. Like, I don't know, like, La Bamba is very, like, raucous. It's fun. It's, you know, it's giving you this energy, and then you go into Bulls on Parade and you're like, the energy is shifted, but it is still there. We have just pivoted that energy. And for those of you listening, I'm doing hand motions. I know you can't see them.
They're very useful hand motions. I'm sorry that you all can't see them.
Just a visual person, you know.
No, yeah, and I agree that we can hear that. It's still, like, we're still keeping that high energy, but we've harnessed it in a different way. We've sharpened it to a point when we get into the Rage Against the Machine. Is there anything that you would like to talk about, or anything that I have missed that I haven't asked you?
I don't. Oh, I'm trying to think now. Now I'm like, oh, I should have studied or something.
It's a standard journalism question.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Yeah.
So we are.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on about Mexican American history. So if anybody ever has any questions, you can ask me. I might not know the answer, but I will have an opinion. This was a thought I had today, just because you had asked if there was a book or a movie that I wanted to make a number out of that I hadn't yet. And I couldn't think for a while, and all I could think of was, when I first started drag, my idea was to try and speak to these, like, 3 academic archetypes of Mexican American men, which are the migrant, the criminal, and the Lothario. And I think that you can kind of break that down across. And then I realized I don't want to be any of those things, right? But to try and speak to that cultural legacy and that indelible mark that these stereotypes left on me and probably leave on other people was really powerful. So I am just kind of, the joy I get the most to just sort of, like, dig into and excavate my own identity in my Mexican Americanness and how that comes out without participating in tropes or things that people think that people of a certain ethnicity or race do. And I'm really happy to have an outlet for that.
Definitely. Well, yeah, thank you so much for the insight into what you've made and what you're doing with your drag. Thank you for talking to me, Macho.
Thank you, Caius.
Thank you for listening to Kings on the Aux. This episode featured Cleveland drag king Macho Grande and was hosted by Cleveland drag king Caius Crow. You can find Macho's looks, performance videos, and upcoming show dates on Instagram at King Macho Grande. You can find me on Instagram at Caius Crow. That's CAIUS Crow. Questions, comments, compliments, complaints? Send me a message on Instagram or email me at caiuscrow@gmail.com. I'll talk to you soon on our next episode. Thank you for supporting local drag.